In December 2022, the NATO Analytical Center surprised the world by revealing that Western countries managed to freeze between $80 and $100 billion. Instead of the initially announced $300 billion, NATO Center for Geoeconomics Deputy Director Charles Litchfield admitted they do not know the whereabouts of the remaining frozen Russian reserves. However, I believe this to be an intentional attempt at disinformation to justify the inability to control the Russian foreign reserves and maintain global financial stability in the West. To be clear, following the freezing of a portion of Russia's foreign reserves, each Western country provided details on the amount of money and bank accounts where the Russian reserves were held. In March, the Ministry of Finance reported that Western countries froze approximately $300 billion, and the Central Bank of Russia released the annual report on the composition of the country's foreign exchange reserves before the suspension of reserves in foreign currencies. According to the information, the total amount of assets in foreign currencies and gold reached $612.9 billion. The Bank of Russia has $481.4 billion in foreign currency assets and $131.5 billion in gold, according to the structure of its reserves as of January 1, 2022. The geographical distribution of the central bank's reserves was also disclosed. 21.5% are in Russia, 16.18% in China, 15.7% in Germany, 9.9% in France, 9.3% in Japan, 6.4% in the USA, 5.1% in the UK, 4.3% in international organizations, 2.7% in Canada, and 2.5% in Austria. Dematorzok added captions and disclosed the allocation of reserves in different currencies. 33.9% in euros, 1% in yuan, 5% in gold, 10.9% in dollars, 6.2% in pounds, 5.9% in yen, 3.2% in Canadian dollars, 1% in Australian dollars, and 0.3% in Singapore dollars. Subsequently, the American magazine Politico revealed that 68 billion euros of frozen Russian assets were mainly in Belgium. In Belgium, 50 billion euros were blocked, while in Luxembourg, 5.5 billion euros were blocked. In these two countries, together with Italy, Germany, Ireland, Austria, and France, over 90% of the blocked assets are held. The European Commission does not have precise information on the amount of Russian national reserves frozen in the EU. In all documents, another amount of 33 billion and 800 million euros appears. Something seems wrong here, especially considering that Western countries had previously debated how to use the $300 billion frozen from Russian reserves and suddenly found them missing. In the current context, situations like this are unusual, and our central bank was previously publicly questioned about the reasons for keeping the funds in the West instead of Russia, and why such a significant amount was frozen. Legally, the foreign exchange reserves belong to the Central Bank of Russia, but it cannot operate with them due to the severe restrictions on capital movement imposed by Western countries. Any bank or financial institution that defies the sanctions or conducts transactions with Russia's ZVR will be prohibited from operating with dollars and euros. The private sector in China cannot circumvent US sanctions due to fears of losing the ability to conduct transactions in dollars. This situation is understandable and requires attention. The Russian central bank has significantly increased the issuance of rubles recently, backing this action with foreign exchange guarantees. In June 2022, more than 630 billion rubles were printed. In July, approximately 1 trillion and 200 billion rubles were added to this amount. Despite this, IMF guidelines prohibit printing money not backed by foreign reserves. But Russia has chosen the right approach by disregarding such Western standards to ensure essential liquidity in its economy. The structure of the resources of the Russian National Welfare Fund NWF, according to the official website, displays the allocation of 259,736 billion rubles from foreign currency conversions, such as 3.455 billion euros and 375 million pounds, to cover the budget deficit of the National Welfare Fund announced in October 2022 at the autocracy. Despite the recent statement by Finance Minister Silyanov that the foreign currency portion of the National Welfare Fund's assets has been frozen due to imposed sanctions, a strange sequence of events is unfolding. Russia is now printing rubles for its economy based on the frozen gold and foreign currency reserves, in a process open to the world, resulting in a sudden loss of a large portion of these frozen reserves by Western countries. How is it possible, and if these reserves really exist? Let's analyze. The sharp drop in the exchange rate of the dollar and the euro against the ruble during the holding of foreign currency reserves by Russia by Western countries suggests that Russia is not interested in these currencies, as it could not operate with them. The central bank has repeatedly mentioned the dollar and the euro as toxic currencies. And what can be said about this, considering that economists of all levels, from the lesser known to the most renowned, have warned about the harmfulness and uselessness of the dollar? In fact, conducting transactions with reserves held in Western countries' currencies is a form of premeditated sabotage. However, what are we witnessing now? The dollar and the euro have recently shown a significant appreciation, suggesting the interest of financial institutions in these currencies. The variation patterns in exchange rates suggest that all restrictions have been lifted, allowing the central bank to use the reserves of foreign currency that were frozen before the onset of widespread sanctions. As a result, the same amount of currency can be exchanged for an additional 50% in rubles. Currently, a chart is being displayed on the screen. The dollar has risen significantly in recent weeks. The chart shows the appreciation of the euro, which does not experience delays. According to the budget project for 2023, the Central Bank of Russia plans to print no less than 2.8 trillion rubles to release frozen reserves. Western banks and financial organizations are faced with the challenge of dealing with the unexpected release of the Russian currency, which will be converted into real rubles. The only alternative would be to confiscate these funds, as they have no guarantees, including Russia's commitments. However, this measure would not only mean admitting one's own defeat, but also setting a precedent that would allow other countries to use this device. Freezing reserves in the West. The country that exemplifies this most prominently is China. As a result of this, the voluntary decision was made to inform the international community about the depletion of Russian reserves, in order to prevent Western countries from knowing the location and use of euros, dollars, yen, and other currencies by Russia. In practice, they simply cancel them, validating the conversion of the frozen currency to rubles. The Central Bank of Russia seeks to make the most of this situation, aiming to increase the value of the frozen currency as an ideal scenario, especially in relation to the constant issuance of rubles compared to the euro and the dollar. Therefore, the answer to the question of what happened to the 200 billion in frozen currency is clear. They did not go anywhere. The West simply thawed them, allowing the legalization of ruble issuance in relation to this currency. A step like this towards the Russian economy, that is, the beginning of issuing money backed by frozen reserves, is a determination of the top echelons. No financial entity is capable of taking on such responsibility. This decision is solely the president's prerogative. Do not be fooled into thinking that all of this was planned. This is a coercive measure adopted by Western countries to protect the financial monopoly. The alternatives are limited. Impose sanctions on the financial sector of the Russian economy due to the illegal issuance of money bypassing IMF rules, or accept this issuance and register the frozen Russian assets. The initial alternative was not successful, so we only have to consider the second option. Russia might be removed from the IMF, but we must view this possibility with satisfaction, as this proposal has already been submitted for evaluation in the State Duma. The suggestion on the screen is to withdraw from all pro-Western international financial organizations. If Russia continues in this dispute, it will be necessary to establish trade relations with it without any exchange, intervention, and subject to Russian conditions. The West cannot act in this way, which complicates the situation. It is hard to believe the claim that 200 billion suddenly disappeared without Western countries knowing their whereabouts. In the modern world, it is unacceptable to simply be afraid to admit that Russia may exert influence over them. The only viable alternative to deal with such issues would be the recovery of lost funds, but this seems to be just an illusion. Finally, definitively, with the necessary documentation, the Luxembourg Ministry of Finance authorized the unblocking of assets previously frozen due to sanctions against the National Depository of the Moscow Exchange. Why so much generosity all of a sudden? According to the conditions set out in Article 2, the competent authorities of the member state have the possibility to approve the release of specific funds or economic resources belonging to the organization listed as number 101 in the annex. In this document, it is possible to verify the date of signature. Furthermore, it is important to note that Vladimir Putin appointed Nabiullina to a specific position. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your comments on this matter.